Keir Starmer and the front bench just seem to be sixth form students playing at politics. That's my impression all the time of them.
And I hope you don't mind the terminology. We were voting, the vote we had, when, if you just looked at the two main parties, was voting for a jobby or a shite.
And once we get to rock bottom, we may get change in this country. And so I was hoping for that.
And that the Scottish Government and the Scottish Parliament will not decide if there's another referendum in Scotland. So why do we keep talking about it?
Hi everybody, and welcome back to Nick Talks. This episode's amazing guest is a gentleman from Craig Houston Talks To, and this episode he's talking to me. He's talking to Nick Buckley. How was that for getting good guests on this show? Craig, first time we've met, first time we've had a chat face to face. Thank you for coming on the show.
No problem at all. Thanks for inviting me, Nick. I'm looking forward to it.
What people don't know is one of our joint friends, Silver Fox from Silver Fox Hot Takes, added me to one of your WhatsApp groups the other day. There's 3 years in a group called the Three Wise Monkeys. You've added me, and it's still called the Three Wise Monkeys. I'm obviously not a wise monkey.
Well, I'm quite happy with that because I felt I was cheating the system by being referred to as a wise monkey. So you three can be the wise monkeys, and it can be three wise monkeys and another guy. I'm quite happy with
that. Again, thanks for coming along. I've been watching your channel last few weeks and find it very interesting. You've got some good perspective on some of the stuff that's going on. So for this episode, let's have a chat about politics, which is your bread and butter. What's going on in the UK? How do you think Starmer's doing? What are going to be the main issues for Starmer and Labour? I feel like the government's failing. It's been failing since day one. And I can't see the government lasting. I can't see Starmer lasting till the end of the year. And I've always said from day one, I can't see this government lasting more than a couple of years. What do you think?
I disagree with one of those points slightly, and that's the fact that they wouldn't survive. Because the only way they wouldn't survive is if they decided to have an election and turkeys don't vote for Christmas. So I can't see that happening. But the popularity is obviously dwindling and dwindling rapidly. And I find it amazing that when we had an election in this country, if you take the politics out of it and your own personal feelings and my personal feelings about any party, we had one party in charge who had a blue rosette on, and they had quite a big majority. And after 14 years of people being sick of them, the nation voted in such a way that they had a massive swing towards another party that had a red rosette on. Now that swing, forgetting about the amount of votes, the actual seats in Parliament, which is what matters, it was massive. And I remember commenting on the night, I was celebrating that night, not because of a Labour victory, I was celebrating because of the demise of the SNP that night, who went down to 9 seats. So I was quite happy. And I made a comment to a friend of mine, and I said, what the United Kingdom has done by switching from one party very comfortably to another one in such a massive majority, yet nobody is celebrating. If this was a normal country where that swing in power had happened so drastic, we would have seen celebrations in the streets of its capital.
Yeah.
But we've seen nothing. And that is because, and I hope you don't mind the terminology, we were voting, the vote we had, when, if you just looked at the two main parties, was voting for a jobby or a shite. That was it. There was no good alternative. So nobody celebrated. And I think what Labour have managed to do is get themselves as unpopular as the Tory party took 14 years to get to, that they've managed to do it in, 7 or 8 months. And I find that phenomenal. I think to not be able to read the room, to not be able to stick by your manifesto promises, by not being able to catch the temperature of the normal citizens in the United Kingdom is absolutely frightening that these people consider themselves politicians.
I completely agree. I think the issue we have with Labour is, you're right, Labour weren't voted in. The Tories were voted out, and I voted against the Tories. I didn't care who replaced them. I just wanted to punish the Tories, otherwise they won't learn. They were just taking us to destruction. And I knew Labour would take us to the same place, but would do it quicker. And once we get to rock bottom, we may get change in this country. And so I was hoping for that. What has surprised me is the incompetence, the lack of understanding, the lack of planning. They've had 14 years in opposition. You think they'd hit the ground running. You think they would know what they're going to do, what's going to be popular, what isn't. They just seem to make huge mistake after huge mistake. And unlike Tony Blair, who I didn't agree with, but he could hold a room. He could hold a crowd. He was good on his feet. You know, he was what you would call a professional politician. Keir Starmer and the front bench just seem to be sixth form students playing at politics. That's my impression all the time with them.
Yeah, I think when you see some of the chaos in the stories and you think, hold on a minute, that is absolutely childish. We've got Rachel from accounts, and we've got Reynolds, who was a trainee solicitor, telling folk he was a solicitor, and then saying, I didn't say that, and all that carry on. And you think, how amateur are these people? And then you've got Lammy, the foreign minister, who is meant to start negotiating with people, if need be, is actually starting to negotiate from the opposite position, saying that we should have repatriation money and all this stuff. And you think, who are you actually serving? Because the way I understand it, and I say this often, and this just happens to be handy because I was booking a holiday. You see this here? See, if you own one of these, you should be the priority of the people in your government. Everybody with one of these, that should be your first thought, and your first action should be to protect these people and do what's best for these people. And if along the way you help other people, then that's a bonus. But your priority should be the British citizen. And it's quite evidently not. It was quite evidently other people. And I find it most bizarre that in the last 27 years, every single party that's gained power at a general election has got there with a manifesto saying, we will reduce immigration. And every single one of them has increased immigration. And that tells me a story. That tells me that they probably want to do it, but can't do it. And it's not difficult. Making less people come here is very, very simple. You just make this less attractive than the place you've just came from, and they won't come. And whether that's, benefits, health service, how we treat them with accommodation, etc., then that would stop. But my fear, the more I look at this, the more concerned I get. I used to think that the UK was a sort of bastion of goodness and fairness and standards and quality. And it's not. And I'll explain why. I used to think that corruption and all these things were for other countries. Now, what we've seen in America very recently with the introduction of their Doge is the USAID thing came public. And it's quite evident from that many, many people, civil servants, politicians, NGOs, all of them have made a pretty penny in corruption from this one thing called USAID. Now, if we accept that, we accept things like Nancy Pelosi, for example, who's made probably a few million in her time as a politician, but her net worth is like hundreds of millions. That's kind of weird, right? How do you do that? So you've got to accept that corruption is vast across in America. So if we're going to say that, and still have the beliefs I had that the UK was some bastion of standards and democracy, and we're somewhere immune to that, that takes some stretch in my imagination. So I think we have to, as a society, accept at least the possibility that some of our politicians, some of our NGOs, and some of our even civil servants might not be squeaky clean as we would love them to be. Once you get that into your head, you can then possibly get an answer to the question of why immigration hasn't dropped. And the reason I say that is we've now created an industry of immigration. And that industry has many mouths to feed and many millionaires and billionaires to create. And we do that by the accommodation in the hotels and the legal aid that we give. So there's, we've got solicitors' businesses who only deal with asylum and immigration cases. So that's another subsection of this industry of immigration. And we've got accommodation. We've got businesses. I know people who work for them, where their sole purpose for the business is to create, to supply furniture when people that are asylum seekers and immigrants go into public housing. They have to have furniture. So that's there's all these facets of these businesses. So it's a multi-billion pound industry called immigration. So when you turn up as the next Prime Minister and say, well, I told the people of the UK I was going to reduce our immigration, which is at 1.2 million per year. I'm going to reduce it. And you start finding that possibly some people that are donators, etc., whether that's donations legally or possibly brown envelopes, again, we need to ignore the notion that we're better than other people with this sort of stuff. Then and only then might you understand why our immigration doesn't come down.
Yep, completely agree with that. I would add on to that, a huge part of the problem is short-termism, and that's because we have career politicians. Career politicians are only worried about the next election. So whatever they do, they want to be seen to be doing something and seen to be successful in a 3-4 year cycle.
Yeah, but that doesn't make sense to me when you consider one of the biggest manifesto promises each and every one for 27 years has made is reduce immigration. And then they do nothing about it for 5 years. It would make more sense to me that you do something, and yet they do absolutely nothing. And it just baffles me. It's not difficult. You could stop immigration. So I don't have a problem with immigration as such, Nick. I have a problem with two strands of immigration. That's fake asylum seekers and illegal immigrants. And the reason I've got a problem with fake asylum seekers, there's a podcaster in Manchester called Baraka, young lad in his early 20s. He spent the first 14 years of his life. He's from Congo, but he's never been in Congo. He was born in a refugee camp in Rwanda. And he spent the first 14 years of his life. And his mother and father spent 17 years in an asylum camp. They ran away from war. The mother had left, they had that many kids, they left a baby in the house. The guns were coming towards them and they fled. And the mum thought the dad had lifted the youngest, and the dad thought the mother had lifted the youngest. And they got a fair distance from their house and they realised nobody had the youngest. The mother left the father with all the other kids and ran back to the house thinking she might never return. So they fled for their own life and ended up in a concentration camp, an asylum camp for 17 years. Now, if we didn't have fake asylum seekers and a system that allows them to keep, appealing decisions to remain in the country when they shouldn't be here, then folk like that will spend 17 years in asylum camps, which is bonkers. Do you know what I mean? And if we have no immigration as well, I run a kids' football club, and we've got a family, or an Afghan family, who the father was an interpreter for the British forces when we were over there. And if he didn't come here, the Taliban would have slit his throat. So we have zero immigration, zero asylum, I think is a tough, big ask. But the levels it's at now, we need even a 50,000 cap would give us enough. Another thing, we say, well, we don't want immigrants. Okay, well, what if Elon Musk wanted to buy a castle in Scotland and come and live here and build an AI factory? Would we say, well, sorry, Elon, we have no immigration? So the notion of zero immigration doesn't quite fit with me. But we need to put a cap on it, circa 50,000, and that would give us enough ability to bring people here that we genuinely could benefit from having here, and doing a bit for the society of the world. But this other notion about the immigration and the asylum, and who made the UK the United Nations? Why? When did we were a massive empire at one point, but that's generations ago. We're not that empire anymore. We're not the police of the world. Yet some people expect us, and some politicians expect us, to still do that. And we must solve the world's problems. And we're like, well, can we solve our own, please? That would be quite nice. Can we concentrate on them for a while? But they don't.
They don't, because they get better press and PR pretending to try to solve foreign problems than actually doing the nitty-gritty that needs to be done in their country and being held account by the people in this country. I've been saying for years, many of our problems are not hard to fix. All it takes is a backbone, some will, and grit and determination to fix our problems. But we don't seem to have anybody with grit and determination. It's all about the next election, that greasy pole, making sure my career is intact. And it's all down, I can see, to career politicians. We don't have statespeople anymore now who put the country ahead of themselves.
Yeah, and I've got a big problem. I'm not a Reform fan. I'm actually, in Scotland, I think Reform's a very totally different proposition to what they are in the rest of the United Kingdom. And I wish them well down south, I really do. If they became the next government, I wouldn't really be that upset, to be honest with you. But in Scotland, it's a different proposition, and things that they've done during the election I could bore you to death and do an hour's podcast on. There's enough for me as a unionist not to be able to vote for them. But one of the politicians, Lee Anderson, he was actually an inspiration for me to put myself up for election in Hollywood in 2026. I saw this guy, and I think he was in the Tory party at the time when I first noticed him, because up until a year ago, I was not very active politically. My politics were important to me 2 weeks before an election when I decided who I was voting for, and maybe a budget and stuff like that. And I would turn and suggest that's the norm, by the way. I think people who are involved in politics, as you and I are the vast minority, a very, very small minority. However, I saw this guy, Lee Anderson, talking once in Westminster, and I thought, he sounds like me with a different accent. He talks to me, he uses the same terminology as me, he's just got a different accent. And if I was born where he was born, I'd probably sound identical to him. And then I start, when you think, well, that's not a normal politician. For what is a normal politician? Or a normal politician is somebody who goes to university, gets a politics degree, comes out, works for an NGO, they then start working for a party, doing some work for them, and the party think, well, we'd like to pay you, but we can't really afford to. So what we'll do is we'll give you a wee comfortable seat in a council somewhere, and that'll get you 20 odd grand a year. And we'll see how you do that. And we might make you an MP or a Hollywood or a European Parliament, and they had that. So we end up with a type, and they do not have a bloody clue. They don't know what's out there. And they've never grown up for those university activist days, and that's what we've got. And listen, there's a fair percentage of them in Westminster, and if you think that's bad, have a wee look at Holyrood. I'll guarantee you the percentage of these people is even more up here, right? And you think, you have not got a clue. And I think that's why a lot of them, they don't get the feeling, they don't understand what's going on in the country, because their bubble is predominantly people that are the exact same as them. And the biggest barometer of that I found was during the summer, where we've seen riots in the streets of the United Kingdom, because the people in the United Kingdom have got fears and concerns, and they are our safety, the amount of knives, the amount of illegal immigrants, and the amount of fake asylum seekers. That's probably four things that are quite high up in the vast majority of normal people in our country. But these people don't know that, because they don't live in a bubble with normal people in our country. They live in a bubble with people that have just done the exact same route as I've already described to you. And I think that's why they don't have a finger on the pulse, and they do really odd things.
Yeah, completely agree. They speak to people and socialize with people who think just like them. So they then think everyone is just like them. And going back to Lee Anderson won his Tory seat as a fluke. No one expected him to win that Tory seat in the Red Wall. It was only because Boris Johnson had that swing in 2019 that he won that seat. He was basically a paper candidate, which means he put his name forward, probably didn't campaign, and suddenly he became an MP, and he got to the House of Commons. And there's a breath of fresh air, I agree. And we need more voices like that. We need more normal people. 50, 60 years ago, we had miners as MPs, captains of the army, it fought in World War I and World War II. And they'd been MPs. They'd had a life before they went into Parliament. And I think we're missing that.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think my hope for Holyrood in 2026 is that I don't really care the rosette colour. To a certain degree, I think I would like to have at least a pro-unionist majority in that place. So they just stop talking nonsense for 5 years and actually deal with what they can deal with. And I want to be in a place where we've got people who, they get up in the morning and they go to their work as an MSP, and they want to get their stuff sorted for Scotland. And what I've been saying for a while is, we've got a book of devolved powers, which includes a lot of things. And there's some things not included, like foreign policy, for example, like immigration. But that building manages to talk a hell of a lot about stuff that they can't deal with. So when, like, the biggest court in the land proved to Nicola Sturgeon that the Scottish Government and the Scottish Parliament will not decide if there's another referendum in Scotland. So why do we keep talking about it? We talk about Gaza, and we talk about Hamas, and we talk about Israel, and you think, we have no influence over that. So can we just get in there and talk about the things that we can talk about, and see for 5 years, don't use the book of devolved powers, wring it dry and abuse every single power we have got. Did you know what? Make Scotland a better place. And I think the only way we do that is we get normal people in there. And you'll never get 130 normal people in there. But even if we get 50 or 60, we can actually make a difference. And once we get in the first day at school, take our rosettes off for a wee minute and say, right, what are you into? And let's find some common ground and stop having bun fights and stop having polar opinions on every single thing in the world. That's impossible, but we kind of do that in politics. If blue say this, red have got to say that, and that's just bonkers. And try and find common ground. And if we can do that in Hollywood and get the big boy pants on, then will that give the rest of the United Kingdom a thing? Think, well, hold on a minute, look what they've just done. Could it help? I don't know. I'm not going to go to Westminster, right? But could causing change and dramatic shift in how politics works in Hollywood drive a benefit to the bigger, for me, which is Westminster, because Westminster get to talk about all the important things. Then great, but we've got to get normal people involved in politics in the first place.
From an outsider looking into Scotland, all I've seen the SNP do is push the narrative for a referendum to become independent. Hence why the things they talk about, they don't have power over, because they don't want to talk about the things they have power over, because they'll be criticised for that, for failing, for not doing enough, for Scotland going down in many of the polls and graphs and income and things. So they want to talk about things they haven't got power over, so they can then have this anti-British stance in the hope that it turns more people away from the Union, in which case they're more likely to get the referendum and become independent. People like that would rather rule over the ashes of Scotland than allow someone else to rule Scotland and be successful.
But the perverse thing is, and I've spoken to nationalists, I've spoken to nationalist ex-MPs and MSPs about this, and I've said to them, by taking what I'm saying to you on board, it might actually be to my detriment. Because if I was selling the notion of an independent Scotland, I'd want to make a good one first and say, by the way, we can actually make this better. But perversely, it seems to be the default for the nationalist is if we have a shit Scotland, then folk will want an alternative. Now, see from 2014 when we had the referendum, I noticed a horrible thing that changed in our country. When I say that, in the north of the country, in Scotland. And that was this, and it's now followed on the rest of the UK, by the way. We were forced by a referendum to make a decision and stand on yes or stand on no. Very, very polar opinions. And since then, something else happened. Up until that point, I would go into a polling booth and make my vote on whatever matter I was voting on. And my relationship with my ballot paper was between me and the ballot paper in the confines of that polling booth. I might have gone home and, when I was married at the time, my wife might say, how did you vote? I'd ask her how she voted, whatever. And that was kind of it, or maybe one or two people at work. That would be it, finished. But since 2014 up here, and I see that's knocked onto the rest of the UK as well, everybody demands to know what you want and what you believe in every single thing. And we almost get forced into polar opinions on everything, whether it's Brexit, Constitution of Scotland, immigration, armed forces, suing soldiers that, shot bad men in Northern Ireland 40 years ago. All these questions were almost Gaza, Israel, you've got to take a side. And it's unpleasant. And I don't think it makes for good government. I think we've got to have someone in power and someone to be a good opposition. But to have the default that you've got to oppose every single thing is wrong, in my opinion. And I think if that's something, we might have a better chance of doing in Scotland, just because the way our voting system is up here, then, we've got a chance that becomes the norm. Because the norm now isn't working. The norm is not working, where we've got polar opinions on everything and we just bun fight constantly. That building in Westminster's got 650 people that are entrusted by the people in each community to go down there and serve their best interests and vote accordingly. Where it's not, it's a bun fight. And it doesn't matter what party's in and what party's the opposition. It'll continue to be a bun fight until we have a change on how we view it.
It'd be a shame to have you on with your accent and not talk about the Holyrood elections in next year, isn't it? 26. Like most people south of the border, I don't know that much about Scottish politics. I remember working in Edinburgh when I was in my 20s, and I was walking to a pub in the centre of Edinburgh, and there were signs outside saying no football colours. And I said to my friend, "What's that about?" And then he explained about the sectarian issues in Scotland, which at that point I didn't know anything about. Another time I went, I had a little Union Jack pin badge on my coat, and someone I was working with said, "If you're walking home tonight, take that off for a start, because you're going to walk through such a neighbourhood, which is safe, but not if they see that badge. You could get yourself into trouble here." So those were shocks to me in my 20s. What's happening in Scotland with the sectarian issues, and what do you think is going to happen at the Holyrood election next year?
Two good questions. First one, the sectarian thing. There's no pitched battles in the streets, Catholics versus Protestants. It doesn't happen, right? Generations ago, I'm talking about my grandfather's generation, you had businesses that were Catholic businesses and businesses that were Protestant businesses, and they would only employ people of a certain persuasion of Christianity. We're not there anymore either, right? There's probably two bastions of sectarianism, and that is Rangers and Celtic. And I'm a Rangers fan. I make no bones about that. And it's bizarre because both of them say they want to fight sectarianism, but they understand that it's one of the things that makes that fixture really explosive and different. It makes it marketable. So both clubs do this, right? And they say, "Oh, we're anti-sectarian," and I believe they are. But then they market the sectarianism. And I'll explain to you what I mean by that. When Celtic have got an anniversary, whether it's 100th or 125th or whatever, they bring out a strip with a tricolour on it. And Rangers often bring out an away strip of bright orange. And I think I've done it 2 or 3 times where that strip's been launched on the 12th of July, which for those who don't have a clue what that means, that was the date of the Battle of the Boyne in the 12th of July, 1690, where King William of Orange won, and many seen that. Although it wasn't a just purely Catholic Protestant thing, there was a lot of other factors involved in that battle. It's seen as a celebration for Protestants. Now, so your clubs do that. So they're kind of marketing this whole idea at the same time saying we're anti-sectarian. So I think the sectarian thing is folk hate me for saying this, but it's great for both football clubs and it's great for the fixtures of Rangers playing Celtic. But as long as that's all it is, as long as it's 90 minutes confined to a stadium and then we don't see pitch battles after it. But unfortunately, what sometimes happens is that night there might be some trouble. And yes, there's people on one side fighting against others, but it's more of a tribal football thing now than I would suggest, driven by sectarianism. In Arsenal and Spurs, when you've got the North London derby, you've got this weird thing with Spurs. So they probably say, Arsenal might sing the odd song about that, but I'm not really thinking the 60,000 people that are at Spurs at the arena are all Jewish. That's just ridiculous. So I think it gets overplayed at times, the actual proper sectarian issues that we have in Scotland just now, yet the two clubs are actually the benefit from it, which is a bizarre. And it seems to be just attached to the football now. Is there other things? Yeah, of course there is. Other issues, you've got orange walks, goodbye chapels, and people get upset and whatever. But even that, there's no pitch battles in the street. We're not heading for a civil war here. So I think it's kind of all right. What's going to happen at Holyrood? Your second question, I don't know, because it's a moving target. There was a big swing away from the SNP at the recent general election, where they went from 30-odd seats down to 9. That's fantastic, and I hope it bankrupts them, because I've lost lots of short money on that. And I hope that continues. It's a really horrible party that I don't even understand why nationalists that want independence want them, because they've had 18 years in power and they're further away from independence than they were in 2014. So I kind of don't understand why even nationalists would buy into their voting for them. So a lot of people come away from them. I think they got about 29% of the vote, which was the lowest for a long time at a general election. But will that carry come the Holyrood elections 2026? I don't think so. I think I can see already, and that's down to Labour being so dramatically terrible.
Right.
Majority of people in Scotland are probably slightly left of centre. Politically, if they sat down and actually analysed it and just didn't jump in bandwagons. And So Labour's always been a stronghold in Scotland, particularly the Central Belt, for generations. But, so I'd imagine a lot of the votes that came away from SNP went to Labour for that last GA. Is Labour making such an arse of it? They'll maybe go back to SNP. So that's that. But SNP, they're as likely as Labour to do something crazy in the next 16 months to put people off them. Look at Nicola Sturgeon, her husband, and the other party treasurer. One of them's been charged, and the other two are waiting to hear their fate. That could kick in months before election. That would have knock-on effects. Plus, you've got two parties, SNP and Labour, that are to do anything bonkers between now and then and put people off them. So it's a difficult one. We'll just need to wait to close at the time and ask me again.
Well, I think next year then, I'll speak to you before next year, obviously, but I'll get you back after the elections and let's see where Scotland is with Holyrood, because most people south of the border haven't got a clue what's going on.
Yeah, most people's bubble doesn't go past their own gatepost. Some people's bubble goes into their communities, some into the area of the UK that they live in, some to the whole UK. So Scotland, I mean, I remember talking to people in holiday and things like that, about the referendum and thereafter. English people, you'd meet them in holiday and they'd be like, "Well, you're upset you didn't get independence." It's like, no, I voted against independence. They're like, "But you're Scottish." You go, "Wow, but if what you believe's true of Scottish people, there would have been 100% of people would have voted yes, would have been independent." But that wouldn't have been the end of one thing, that'd been the end of two things, because the United Kingdom would have ceased to exist at that precise moment. So the United Kingdom is only in existence for the last 10 years because we found enough people that were unionists like me, or enough, which is a fair chunk in the middle, that I think I'm not that bothered either way. They were managed to be convinced to remain with the status quo. And if that hadn't happened, we would be no United Kingdom.
Exactly, yeah.
Finished at that point. So, and I think that's why I've got such issues with some people where the disrespect that people show Scotland, and Scottish Unionists in particular, by thinking we're all William Wallace Braveheart wannabes. We're not. The 55% of us rejected that notion. And if we hadn't, there would be no need for Westminster, because you might use the building, but it wouldn't have been the UK government anymore.
We all would have been living in a different country, because that would have changed this island forever if the union goes. Yeah.
Yeah, and listen, I'm sure there'll be a lot of people down south that would have been quite happy with that, I can understand why. So, but that's the truth and the reality. If Scotland hadn't voted against that independence offering 10 years ago, there would be no United Kingdom. There would be no Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, because there wouldn't be a United Kingdom.
Well, I was happy with the results. I was happy with the 55%. The union's important, and it's been damaged over the last couple of decades, but it's still there. We still need it. Craig, thank you very much for coming on. Let's do this again soon, and let's see where this Labour government's taking us and where the SNP want to take us.
Well, thanks for having me on, Nick. It's been enjoyable. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. Bye-bye.